Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are right now. My name is Agnes Nsofwa. I'm joining you from Melbourne, Australia. I am Zambian born. I've been in Australia for about 18, 19 years now, and I'm excited to be here. Let me begin by thanking Ms. Bernie Davies for inviting me to participate in the second Your Way conference, your Global Women's Conference. Congratulations, Bernie. I'm excited to learn from all these fabulous women presenting in this year's conference. Before I begin, let me tell you a bit about myself. I'm a mom to 4 beautiful humans. I'm an accountant, a registered nurse, and other things that I'll talk about. But among all these, the most important thing that I do in my life right now is being a global sickle cell advocate. I'm here today to share my journey becoming a global sickle cell advocate and what's next for me in my journey and the years to come. There are a million things in my life that I've come to fear and that I'm so scared of. I'm scared of lions. I'm scared of snakes, the vicious dogs. I can't stand a dog that I don't know back. The funny thing is I actually own a dog. But of all these things in the world that appear frightening to me or to others, the things that are most terrifying for me are the things that you can't see, the unknown. Childbirth is a beautiful gift. I'm sure many of you here can attest to the wonders of being a parent. I can see the bags underneath your eyes from where you are right now, just thinking about your beautiful families. I know this because it wasn't long ago. I was a mother of 3 with my 4th child on the way. I'd been through the steps before 3 times. I knew the routine. I had very easy pregnancies for all my 3 children. But when our daughter was born, actually, we named her Joy for the obvious reasons that you're going to see in this presentation. Joy and I did not have a pleasant or seamless journey during my pregnancy. During the 9 months, I had contracted a mysterious illness that doctors couldn't diagnose. It actually became so severe that I ended up spending weeks in intensive care before being tested for everything under the world. They tested me for malaria, HIV/AIDS, TB of the bones, cancer. They put cameras down my throat, anything that they could think of. But despite their efforts, they couldn't find any evidence of what was really happening with me. And so what do you do when you turn up cold? You just move on and hope for the best. In the end, the doctors did find a way of managing me. They put me on steroids. And somehow my body actually started responding and I got better. And I did end up having a full pregnancy and I gave birth to Joy. Joy being born brought us so much happiness. We didn't care how hard we fought to get there. It wasn't long before we noticed some changes in our behavior though. We called them funny symptoms because we just couldn't imagine. We had 3 kids before. What was this? We didn't think it was anything serious. Our doctors reassured us that she was healthy enough to keep living a normal routine. So we kept a close eye for over the following years just to see what was happening with those funny symptoms. At just about 14 months old, Joy was officially diagnosed with sickle cell disease. This meant at the time she had 87% of red blood cells had turned into a funny disc, which was sickle cells. So for those people that don't know what sickle cell disease is, I'll just give you a brief explanation of how you can know that this is sickle cell disease. For normal people like you and me, our red blood cells in the body would take about 120 days for the new ones to come in. They move nicely in the vessels with no complications at all. The red blood cells play a major role in our body to transport oxygen to all parts of the body. But for somebody who has sickle cell disease, those red blood cells die within about 20 days. And so obviously, because the body takes oxygen from these cells, people with sickle cell anemia or sickle cell disease, there's different types, they do lack enough oxygen and other complications. That is another presentation for this on another day. Now, This diagnosis for us led to a new realization on life. This meant that Joy's life would be changing quite dramatically, very quickly for us, actually. But it also meant that I had to come to terms that I was a sickle cell carrier, something that I didn't know about, that my husband was actually a sickle cell carrier himself, that he didn't know about, because none of our parents knew and none of our parents had told us that we had the sickle cell trait. It was very startling to discover that, and at first had been absolutely no idea that we were supposed to actually even understand it as much as we could. How could I? How could everyone do anything? The thing is, nobody should expect to deal with sickle cell disease, and therefore nobody really knew or knows how to handle this situation. Or that was our new situation at the time. It was scary. And it was a lonely place for us to deal with. Dealing with the unknown territory is often very scary. So today I want to share my journey with you all. Sickle cell disease may not be the loudest illness out there, but certainly is causing unnecessary hardships in families all over the world, especially in the sub-Saharan Africa. The Center for Disease Control approximately states that sickle cell disease affects millions of people in the world, and also finds that it affects a lot of people, mostly in the sub-Saharan Africa. African Americans as well, Hispanics, Indians, a lot of Italians, Greeks, and those people in areas where there's malaria, we just put it that way. We are facing a silent crisis that a lot of people, especially in these places that I've actually mentioned, do not know about. One that we continue forgetting to address because it exists in the veins of our society, in places where we don't look, in communities we don't support enough. When Joy was first diagnosed, I didn't know what to expect. But I did know that I was going to throw myself at this hard as I could to get everything she needed. The more I learned about sickle cell disease, the more I understood how difficult this road was going to be. We had only begun. So my family and I packed our bags. We were in Western Australia at the time. After living there for the first 4 years of our life, we packed our bags and moved to Sydney, hoping for a better treatment option for her. In Australia, or in Sydney, I decided to change careers after working several years in the corporate world. I decided to study nursing. For me, that was a way of fighting for joy. It was very important for me to understand the whole picture of this illness. Doctors in Perth informed us of all the options that they had on the table for Joy, that Joy could have a bone marrow transplant one day if we had to get a cure for her. But at the time, that was something that we could not actually even think of because of what we had seen in our community and what we had read and understood about the riskiness of having a bone marrow transplant. The only option for us at the time was the only drug that was available for her to manage the condition, which is called a drug called hydroxyurea. But even with that drug, after a few years, that drug stopped working for Joy. By the time Joy was 5, it had stopped being effective for her, and it gave a bit of complications or side effects. So we had to stop. And what was next for us was trying any other options, which are very limited. We tried having blood transfusions for a few months, and that also came in with different complications. Among them was iron overload and having antibodies. So we changed to red blood cell exchange, and that was the last option for us. And life became normal at the time. But as time went on, we realized that that too wasn't something that she could live with long term, because there's so many risks for blood transfusions, just like there's risks for bone marrow transplant. So our family started revisiting the reality of her getting a bone marrow transplant at one point. The odds were in our favor because for a bone marrow transplant, you need to have a sibling donor, 100% donor. And we had that. We had our third child, who was 100% donor to our joy. And after a lot of discussions with the doctors, we decided that she could have this bone marrow transplant. It took time, it took therapy, it took reading, it took prayers, a lot of prayers, among us, everything else, a lot of prayers from different people for us to actually be in a place to accept that treatment. And so on the 21st of February, 2019, our daughter underwent a bone marrow transplant to cure sickle cell disease. It was very successful, very minor complications, and her body responded very well. She started producing correct red blood cells. And we stayed in hospital for minimum time, including the time for the chemotherapy to work. On day 40, we were discharged from hospital. So you might be wondering, from here, that Agnes, where are you? Why are you here? Your daughter was cured 2 years ago. Well, the answer to that is because I'm not done. We are not done. Because as long as there are families who have to endure the fears of living with sickle cell disease, the risky hospital visits, the sleepless nights, we need to continue educating the public about the fight for sickle cell disease, and most importantly, how to cope with everything that comes with it. During the time my daughter was, enduring living with this condition, I read so much. I had so much information that I felt I couldn't keep to myself. So the only way I knew how, or for me to cope with her condition, was for me to keep my mind busy. Even up to now, I'm so accustomed to keeping my mind busy. I don't do one thing. If you Google me, you're going to see, or even go on social media, that I'm one person who doesn't do one thing, because I like keeping my brain busy. I like doing a lot of things. During the time that she was going through this condition, I started a Facebook page as a way of supporting other people like myself. I started posting information, good information about, things in the sickle cell space, because for people who don't know, people living with sickle cell disease go through a lot of hardships, and most people go to social media to look for help, but also to share their stories. And if you are one of a new parent like I was years back, and you read some of these stories that people share on social media, you can be depressed. And that's, that what happened to me. I started reading these messages on social media, and I could picture my daughter years from, the time I was reading, how she was going to live her life. And so, because I had control of what I wanted to see on Facebook, I decided to create a page for myself to post good news, about people having bone marrow transplants, about good therapies that were coming out, about people living with sickle cell disease having different dreams, having different careers. That's what I was doing, but also posting information, real articles, research articles about sickle cell disease on that platform. And being in Australia, sickle cell disease is considered a rare disease. So I found an opportunity to get in touch with people around the country, to be able to share our lives together. And so after doing that for about 5 years, I decided with other people in the community to form a not-for-profit organization so that we can formally be advocating and raising awareness in Australia. It had become quite clear to me at that point that we needed to do that. I knew that a bone marrow transplant wasn't available for everyone, not only in Australia, but also the people that were contacting me from different parts of the world. The number of patients having access to hydroxyurea as well is not that great, not just in Australia, especially in the less resource countries where really my heart lies in terms of this disease, because it affects mostly people that look like me. I knew I wanted to make a difference in people's lives, those that are going through sickle cell disease, whether they knew what to do or not. And I wanted every family to know all the other options, because I know they didn't, some of them didn't, just like what I was going through before. Because I know what it is like to go through this as a family. And I had so much information that I wanted to share with the world. In the past 10 years, the number of sickle cell disease patients in Australia has doubled. And so has our efforts to do that. The first 3 years after opening our organization, which is called Australian Sickle Cell Advocacy, we have managed to be in all the major states in this country so that we are able to advocate and raise awareness about sickle cell disease in these places. Sickle cell disease is aggressive. It's a disease that burdens infants, children, as well as adults. And we, as a community, as a world, we also need to be aggressive when we are dealing with this condition. I'm not a typical advocate. You know, some people might be surprised of the things that I do. I like raising awareness in different forms and shapes. I do the normal. I will knock on policy doors. I will post information on social media about sickle cell disease. But I like doing something different. And I've seen the power in doing something different. People notice and people know what sickle cell disease is. And during one of the things that I do on LinkedIn, I got in touch with Miss Davies through somebody who does totally different from what I do. And for me, and having an opportunity like this gives me a sense of relief to know that I will reach women on this platform who've never heard about sickle cell disease. I will reach Miss Bernie's audience who've never heard about sickle cell disease. This is the way I want to use my platform, to be able to raise awareness in different aspects and be able to know that those people that have never heard about this condition, that they can also be affected. Because I know out of some of you will be watching this, if you go and get tested today, you might just find that you have the sickle cell trait. But it's not very common for us to know about this. So what's the next chapter for me? You know, people might be surprised that I'm done. I'm not done yet. Annually, more than 3,000 babies in sub-Saharan Africa are born with sickle cell disease, but they do not live past the age of 5 years, most of them, because of the lack of access to testing, comprehensive clinical care, and early intervention programs. These are very, very simple if you look at them: testing, comprehensive clinical care, early interventions. If a child is tested or the mother is tested during pregnancy, there will be comprehensive clinical care because of the early interventions program. Unfortunately, that's not happening, not just here in Australia, but most countries as well. I can tell you that in Australia, we don't have newborn screening at all for babies born in this country. For sickle cell disease, there's no newborn screening. Prenatal testing, it depends which doctor you see and which hospital you are in. It's not mandatory as well. And hence, we cannot have early intervention programs because we don't know when the babies are born that they have sickle cell disease. So you can only start early intervention programs if you know the status of the child born with sickle cell disease. So for as long as we don't implement these programs, not only in Australia and most, especially African countries, this won't happen. So if you may ask me that what's my next chapter, this is my next chapter, to advocate not only in Australia that my daughter is cured, She presented to hospital at 14 months old. There was no testing for her, no early interventions program, but we can do better for the next child. Because once we do all these things, then you're going to see that children are going to live over the age of 5. They will live as healthy, productive adults in our societies. And so in Australia, I've managed through my organization, we've managed to apply for a newborn screening. And I'm glad to say we've got the backing of the highest health minister in this country, the federal minister of this country, who's backed our application and hoping it goes through. It's still in the process. But also, I'm from Zambia, and I'm trying the best that I can to work with local communities for us to enhance the programs. We are fortunate that through the different organizations in the world, there's newborn screening now in Zambia, which started in April. But working with local communities for us to encourage women and families to be able to take advantage of these screening programs, but also to encourage people to get tested so that they know their sickle cell status and make an informed decision. Once you get tested, you know that there's chances of me having a child with sickle cell disease. You can do one or two things. You can either decide to go ahead with your pregnancy, or you can decide to have a family with somebody who doesn't have the sickle cell trait. At the end of the day, it's your decision. You need to have that information for you to make that informed decision. So my job and the job of other advocates that I want to partner with in Zambia is for us to inform them of this, give them this information so that we can eliminate early death of children dying because of sickle cell disease, implement the testing, comprehensive clinical care, and early intervention programs for us to have productive families, adults living with sickle cell disease. And so the other aspects that I want to also continue is raising awareness, not just in developed towns, but also in rural communities as well, where there's a lot of prevalence for sickle cell disease, because these rural communities, this is where the prevalence is high. As I said, I'm not a typical advocate. So I have done so many things that I'm trying to do. And the funny thing is about being an advocate, we don't have a handbook teaching us how to advocate. We don't go to uni to study advocacy. In today's world with social media on our fingertips, we must be creative to put the message across. So what have I done? I've told you I'm not a typical advocate. I have what I call Sickle Cell Talks with Agnes. This is where I come on Facebook, where I will talk to anyone. I don't actually even do any background checks. Well, maybe I'll do once or twice. To have anyone who has sickle cell disease, a caregiver, somebody who's got sickle cell disease, we are commonly known as sickle cell warriors. They'll come on my platform and talk about their experiences. For us, and for me, the reason why I do this is to make it normal to discuss sickle cell disease, because one thing you're going to know about sickle cell disease is that most people, especially in less resource countries, they do not like talking about their status for obvious reasons of, one, the employer might not employ them, or they might be treated differently. The way it was a long time ago in somebody living with HIV/AIDS, this is how it is in most communities for people living with sickle cell disease. So I've created this safe platform where people who are comfortable enough can come and talk about their experiences without being judged, because I understand from a caregiver's point of view how my daughter lived with this condition for 10 years of her life. I've also created what I call Amplify Sickle Cell Voices. This is also an extension of Sickle Cell Talks with Agnes, but on a larger scale. In 2020, I brought over 43 people from 23 countries to come and talk about sickle cell disease, any topic. We talked about sickle cell disease for 5 months straight, every fortnight with a different topic, from people from different countries, people that I barely knew, that we came together and had these discussions. From that platform, we ended up forming an international organization called the same name, Amplify Sickle Cell Voices International, where we are encouraging people that are living with sickle cell disease themselves to empower themselves to talk about their experiences and help communities, different communities where they are, not just on social media. Use your experience to empower yourself firstly and help a project where you are so that you can do your part to raise awareness and to advocate for something that you actually live with. Because only somebody who lives with this condition understands fully the struggles that they go through. One of the things that I've done as well, in line with changing the narrative of sickle cell disease, is introduce what I'm calling Amplify Sickle Cell Voices Writers Club, ASVI for short. This, again, is an extension of talking about these conditions. It's now putting that in written. In May 2021, we are publishing our first edition of a book made by people living with sickle cell disease, by caregivers caring for children with sickle cell disease, and by advocates who are advocating for the rights of people living with sickle cell disease, and clinicians or healthcare providers if they want to be part of this. So we are bringing stories, a collection of stories in this book so that people can read and understand the struggles of these people being affected by this condition. Other things that I do as well is speaking like this, where I want to highlight the struggles of people living with sickle cell disease and what we as a society can do to change the narratives. One of the things you don't understand or you need to know is that sickle cell disease has been neglected for years. It took almost 80 years for society, for this world to find a drug for sickle cell disease. And that came by mistake. It wasn't something that they went in the lab deliberately to find, let's do this, let's do that. The drug that they found after almost 80 years, and that 80 years I'm putting in inverted commas because when sickle cell was discovered in the lab in America, it had been around for thousands of years in Africa, but they found it in the 1900s in America in the lab. So that's the time that we say almost 100 years now. But for the first 80 years, there was no drug. They found a drug by mistake, which was a cancer drug that they did the phase 1, phase 2, even before they went to phase 3. It was so successful, they started using it for sickle cell patients. It took almost 20 years to have any other drug on the market. And in 2017, one other drug came on the market. And then 2019, 2 more drugs came on the market. So historically, there's been no support for this condition. And so I do my best and other advocates for us to encourage talking or highlighting or raising awareness because of social media, which has become so handy in everything that we do in our society. And so every opportunity that I have, that I've been given, like now, I can talk about something else, but I would want to highlight the reasons why we should continue advocating and raising awareness about sickle cell disease. Another thing that I do, I'm an author. I just authored the first book ever for children's book author. I wrote about, you guessed it right, sickle cell disease. When my daughter was old enough to understand her condition, I found it very difficult for me to explain to her why she was different and how that condition affected her in a simple language. So I decided that I'll be writing books about sickle cell disease for children from the age of 5 or from 2, if they can read. So I've authored the first book. It's called So I Have Sickle Cell Disease. That's a deliberate topic. You know, when you have a child, this is the character is based on a child who's 5 years old. And the mothers could see the symptoms, but they had no idea what the child was going through. And finally, they have a diagnosis. Then they're like, oh, so she has sickle cell disease. So that's my first book. My second book is almost out. It's complete. It's almost out, but it's going to go into detail about what sickle cell disease is all about. And that should be coming out sometime next year. And out of all this, I have come to appreciate the things that I went through, the do's and don'ts of being an advocate, the disappointments, the achievements, all sorts of things that you go through being an advocate, not so much in a typical sense. As I've said, I do something different. I have managed to reach the world, to be able to highlight this condition. Anywhere where you find Agnes, you are going to see that the sickle cell disease attached to that. I became a global sickle cell advocate because I'm passionate about what I do. So last year, 2020, I brought 43 people together. This year, 2021, I brought 51 people together again from about 24 countries this time. And this time, instead of us discussing for 12 topics, we went ahead and did 18 topics. I'm so excited and that it was a success. We managed to do that. We just finished. And now we'll be going into season 3, which is next year, to see how we can do that. COVID allowing, we want to come in different communities to be able to break the myths, be able to change the narratives, be able to help individuals themselves face, because this organization is for the people that are living with sickle cell disease, be able to empower them first, and then be able to help communities. That's what we are doing next year. And out of all this, I have become a consultant, an advocate. Anyone who wants to advocate for whatever they believe in, the steps that I've mastered or the steps that I've gone through can work for anything. So I decided to start consulting, an advocate consultant, just to help people that, you can do it wherever you are, whatever you're going through, if you put your mind to it and be able to learn and understand that it's not easy, but if you don't give up, it's going to happen. So if you've got anything in your community that you are facing and folding your hands for somebody to help, you are the person who can stand up and say, enough is enough. What can I do? And that's where you call me and ask me, Agnes, this is the issue that we have in our community. How can you help me? And I will help you to be a strong, effective advocate. So with that in mind, I just want to say thank you so much, Bernie, for giving me this opportunity to talk about something that I really, really value in my life. And that for anyone who's living with sickle cell disease, one day we will get there where you don't have to have sleepless nights, not knowing what tomorrow will hold because of another sickle cell crisis. Because going forward, we want to ensure that the sickle cell scientific world out there can find a cure, and it can be done if we all work together. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for having me. I look forward to the rest of the presentation by the fabulous presenters this conference, and I look forward to coming back next year. Thank you so much, Bernie.